Hey Dan, we're all live. Welcome to
Hey, how you doing?
the show. All good. Thank you so much. You know what, Dan? It's actually we had a very quick chat just a moment ago before we went live, and I didn't get the chance because I was quite keen for us just to go for it before we started chatting, chewing the fat and talking about all sorts to get it going. But I just got to say, it's brilliant to have you on. We've spoken loads and communicated loads for a number of years actually. So to finally actually have we always talked about it, face-to-face chats. At the moment, this is what the face-to-face chats look like, I guess, in this pandemic world.
Look, last time I saw someone face-to-face that wasn't someone that I knew was a long time ago, and here we are using videography, which is brilliant. There's a lot of good things going on. When you look at society at the moment, coming together, albeit virtually, is super important. And like you, connecting with others is bold and brave, and it's jolly well welcomed.
No, definitely. So just a quick intro for our listeners. You're the CEO of Ofixu, which is, I guess, like the Airbnb for sort of commercial space. But do you want to just give the audience a little bit of an intro just about what you're doing now and your backstory, and then we just maybe talk about the whole sort of commercial property space and where that's going.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just having a think before our call that there are so many new types of inquiries for workspace that are very different from pre-COVID times. So, for example, yesterday, it was actually my wife. I got up this morning, my wife and my kids were around me, and it's all hectic at home, and we're just having a chat. And she said, "Look, I've been on Facebook this morning, and this contact of mine and I just thought," dropped out there for a second. Oh, we're back. Is those types of examples I'm seeing crop up more and more, which is that, of course, people don't think it's necessary now to commute into city centres. If they can avoid it, they can cut down their overhead costs, their travel costs, the time it takes to travel into work, and they can actually live a better life more locally in some ways, because you can hopefully you'll be able to access gyms and all your sort of salons and everything you like on a local level. And I think it might feel to many that we're losing something in the way of the buzz of going into central London or whatever city you're in, but you are gaining potentially as much as 4 hours extra in your day to do what you love doing. And that can be work, it can be, your leisure time, whatever it is, and getting a better overall balance. And I think what I'm seeing is that, central London comprises of lots of high-end, CRE, commercial real estate, which has for many years started becoming underutilized. And we saw the opportunity pre the pandemic because there were so many digital nomads. There are just thousands, if not millions, of people who can work remotely or work from home and don't need to travel in at all. So there was already a rise in WFH before the pandemic, and we saw the opportunity back then, and we thought, well, chances are it's going to become more and more prevalent that people want to work more locally or hybridize working from home with working in a more local and conducive work setting, something other than a coffee shop. So we sort of saw that there was this growth in the sector for WFH. But of course, post the pandemic, what this seems to have done, this pandemic, is accelerated the need for others to climb onto the bandwagon, but also from a very real life, albeit very challenging real life scenario, learn to adapt to a new way of working. So in talking to people in Canada and America and London, it seems to be a global phenomenon, which is that, I don't think people will see a return to the old normal way of working. And it's going to be more about downsizing your current head office, if that's in a city centre, and then adding to that more local or regional satellite hubs, if you will, or places where people can work 2 or 3 days a week. Because as we all know, the reality of working around your children is extremely difficult. We love them very, very much, but it is not practical. You can't think straight. You can't hear yourself speak, hear yourself think. And most of all, it's not a professional setting at all. So unless Starbucks are prepared to open up another 100 stores along the high street per town centre, then really what's the next best option? So Ofixu's premise, its product, was built to try to do two things. One, help underutilised properties become monetised by renting them out for on-demand access, either be it as a solopreneur or small startups and groups of people, or that you would be able to find an easy and conducive way to book a workspace. It's a bit like, if you're traveling on holiday, the analogy of Airbnb is the closest one that we really can use. But what you should get, in theory, is a bit more bang for your buck, because we deal with co-working and service offerings, but the chances are that where those are great provisions and you get all of the frills around it, you get reception staff, you get high-end telco and IT and comms built into your packages, whereas you might lose a bit of that on the private hosted spaces. What you gain is potentially more space, a more real and authentic experience, but most of all, collaborating with like-minded people, some of which you probably already know from your local area. And there are so many co-working brands popping up all the time. We've just received instruction from a provider that has gone outside of the city scope and created 12 co-working centres across Greater London, including the likes of Wood Green, which you might think, well, my goodness, North London, it's quite far out. Surprising to have a co-working product, co-working brand pop up there. But if you imagine you're serving quite a big local community, you can see where this market can go towards. We can't guarantee that it isn't going to return back to pre-COVID normality in the next 2-3 years. It may well return to the old way of working. But I do think that once all the stats have settled down a bit, once all the statistics have settled down a bit, we then know, without trying to forecast, you can't necessarily forecast accurately, but if we get down to, let's say, 40% of people that want to work from home and a local setting and just travel into the city maybe or central cities once or twice a week, then that looks as though it's becoming the new normal. And 40% is a huge market shift. And I think it's one that I'm hopeful Ofixu will be around to help people with over the next 2 to 3 years and transition towards the new work 2.0, as everyone calls it. So yeah, that's my view on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you see that playing into that sort of bigger picture? What are the new city centres going to look like in terms of, the numbers of people sort of commuting in terms of that whole support network of businesses and cafes and pubs and restaurants that support that business community that, come in. And then what's going to happen then if that starts to lessen, how's that going to impact on prices, in terms of commercial real estate? How's that going to impact on, I guess, even sort of that whole sort of migration outwards? Because people might even still say, well, hang on, I don't even need to live in that commuter belt anymore. I could live, in Scotland and travel down to wherever, once a month. So I guess just from what and what's interesting as well, actually, Dan, because you're able to, I guess, get a viewpoint potentially, across multiple countries, because you're in multiple sort of areas, time zones, and potentially seeing different things. So I don't know if you're seeing consistent patterns or there's sort of slight differences. I know there's 101 questions there, but let's break that down. So in terms of that sort of the city centre, how's that going to change, do you think?
It's definitely something that really we need to be more involved with other countries. We aren't the finished article by a long stretch. In a way, we're sort of still quite a young business, regardless of the age of the company. We're going into a new transition with everybody else. You just can't pull through your plans that you had pre-COVID as clearly as others might think. I think we all have to think, practically and sensibly about what the future does look like. So if that's the question we're asking here, and that's what I think you're asking, I would suggest that smart cities become the new thing that become apparent, where if you're traveling into a city centre, you may have your central head office that comprises of enough desks, meeting space, and visitor space to just provide, for the most part, a workplace for the C-suite, so for the board of directors to sit and do their regular work, for clients to come in a very easy but close setting, and a meeting space. On the peripheral, the lifestyle events going on around, and maybe the changes in the landscape, from high-rise skyscrapers through to traditional offices in, let's say, Baker Street. If you look at the top and tail of how the city looks for real estate, I personally think that you'll start seeing the change of use being more apparent. More apartments being built within the city centres, where maybe those that had maybe got up to the congestion charge for their residential living, may actually enter a little bit further into the centre of London, because if there's so much underused commercial real estate, what else are you going to do with it? So I would have thought there'd be a big rise in luxury serviced apartments. I think there'll be a big rise in facilities such as gyms, hopefully cinemas, all that kind of stuff. I think we're going to see quite a change, but it's not going to happen overnight. On a local level, if we are seeing those workspaces coming up, which we are, then that must be a consensus that enough companies and brands have taken to say, we're just not going to do this on a whimsical basis. They would have already seen some assurance pre-pandemic that there was a rise in the way people were working remotely, and enough to suggest that now they've done it for a year, that trend can keep rising. On a more central London setting, if you took areas such as, St John's Wood, or pockets around central London, very convenient, you might find those of Paddington area or St John's Wood or Hammersmith residentially want to get closer into the city centre. If the likes of serviced apartments and private accommodation becomes more popularised, it could be that you're overlooking Regent's Park one day, but the next day you might be overlooking Oxford Street, because you've got a beautiful apartment that sits across the top floor of one of the old uppers that sits above the retail level. Who knows where it's going to go? But that's my perspective. I think we've had such a big, such a rude awakening in the way that real estate as a whole looks, is that you just got to follow the trends and look what the demand is to see where it's all going. And I think the current, local roads are enough to give you, an impression of where people are moving around. In my local area, the traffic is heavy at certain parts of the day, but it seems to stop and circulate as opposed to go towards central London. So I travel about 3 miles in the morning, and I see a big gap of empty roads, and I'm just thinking, well, it just tells me that all the traffic is sort of going around locally. The trains are really quiet. So I think there's enough going on during this current phase to see that there will be a hybridization. I'm sure lots of people want to get back to the city centre. We'll also help those companies. We are helping those companies. But, in answer to your question, I'd expect to see huge lifestyle changes, a repurposing of central London to cater for all sorts of wants and needs, and maybe the higher earning demographic will probably spend more time there, and startups that want to huddle together 6 or 7 guys rather than taking real estate in Shoreditch may say, well, actually South London Balham is good enough for us. We don't need to go as far in, and actually it gives us more time to build our business, which is very time consuming. So that's my kind of vision. I think likes of New York, probably the same, but I think it really depends on what country you're in. You take Sweden and Norway, there's a lot less of a high-rise structure to their buildings. There's a lot more spread and less population, more space per capita head than there is in London and New York. So you can't really have a fair assessment of every city. And as I said, we're still in the very early stages as a company, but that's the sort of vision, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think from both a business perspective and an investment perspective, it's always good to sort of look at, what's it going to be like in the next 5, 10 years, because whatever business decision or investment decision you're making now, you need to be thinking about, okay, well, when I get that return, what's it going to look like in 5 and 10 years, and how's that going to sort of play out? But it's very interesting, and I'm certainly sort of hearing just ad hoc, how lots of big organizations with these big commercial premises are suddenly going, hang on a second, why have we got all this big, expensive office space that is just not needed now? And actually, we're not worried about our productivity, because actually that's turned out to be fine. And I guess what you're saying is a lot of those big workspaces are going to have to be repurposed, chopped up effectively, however that looks, whether it's, turned into resi. And do you also see maybe in smaller pockets of businesses, or the actual big offices being broken down into much more sort of utilized smaller micro spaces for different businesses?
I think that's on the plan still. I think, you saw Action and Aviva last week talking about shutting down their head offices, or, some of their buildings. And I don't actually know what will happen to that real estate. I think a lot of it will be transformed into residential. Some of it will be a mix. I still think there's an interest and a desire for sort of workation, they call it in the States, like where you've got a hybridization of work life and home life, in one building. It could be ideal for, college leavers, grads to say, right, we've got our first at Oxford or Cambridge, whatever it is they've got. What's the next step? And it might be that they want to cohort in a living and working type environments. I think there's a case for that.
That's interesting.
Right, personally, although there's some people out there that are saying that that's not going to happen, but I think there will be some of those cropping up. I think that the chopping up and different formats, I think that's still in construction. I think it's a huge change. As you can imagine, lots of people in property, not so much in residential but in commercial, have had delays because, frankly, the lockdown end date is somewhat unknown. The inoculation's good because it's gone through to the 60 plus age group, I think, as of today. And then it's still got to get its way through to the other age groups by autumn. So I think there'd be a clearer picture in autumn. And presumably, if those that are investing in CRE, or those that want to be a part of that change of use of CRE into residential, they've got the months ahead of them now to slowly and surely, catch up with the up-to-date demand and what they're going to see. Again, you could talk to all the finance guys in the world who in 2020 forecasted plans for 2021, and you might as well have torn those up, chucked them out. The finance forecasters are fantastic at what they do, but with a force majeure like this, it has been impossible to see any kind of growth at all, other than sort of live information, as it comes through every day. We're all working around a new normal, which, if I'm honest with you, I think I hear about bull market and bull swing and all this stuff. I think the summer, sort of June onwards, should show us a bit more in the way of where the dust is settling as to, what the new normal looks like. And, it's still a new frontier. We haven't reached the horizon. We haven't got there yet. But there is much being done already in terms of pivoting to the new ways of working locally. I'm not aware personally of change of use of city-centric real estate. But another example is I was driving up the road the other day. There was a shop on the corner that they actually occupied 3 shops adjacent to each other with a big glass frontage on it. And it had been sat there for ages, and I thought someone's going to snap that up. There's no doubt in my mind someone's going to snap it up. And I think, is it called P65 or P45? Not P45. That's something 45. It's some fitness gym brand. I've seen it online, and they bought this shop out, and it looks fantastic what they've done. It looked like an old sort of tired bed company, but it looks really good now. I went to see a property yesterday with a friend of mine. He's just taken over a historic building in Hampstead, which you always thought what goes on in that place is immense pub. I mean, the space must be 30,000 square feet in total. It's huge. It's kept its facade and the look and the feel of the outside. When you go in, you've got this high-end modern workspace, which is over 2 floors. And he must have bought that building at a snip, and I think that's the thing right now. If there are property investors out there, they must be knowing that they're getting 30% discounts on some of these properties quite easily, because it's all there for the taking. So plenty going on, plenty to look out for, and I don't think we'll see the true picture until sort of autumn time, in my opinion.
No, and it almost takes that sort of bravery to make those moves now, when everyone else is fearful of certain sectors. Now is probably the time, like you said, to jump on those opportunities if you have a clear vision of where you think it's going to pan out. And it's interesting, isn't it, when you start thinking about those old buildings, which some pubs are, unfortunately, for example, going to never reopen. Some restaurants, unfortunately, never going to reopen. So what's going to happen with those spaces, repurposed into multi-unit offices or whatever it is? What an interesting sort of angle and perspective. Do you think there's going to be two questions, I guess? Is the first is, when this all sort of pandemic sort of started, and obviously people were working from home, was that a trend that you saw that was going to continue, or did you sort of have a feeling or a sense from the community that you work with that actually people will soon, like you mentioned right at the beginning, that realistically working from home is nice until you realize what it's actually like for real, and the reality kicks in of having to homeschool and do all that stuff? Actually, that desire to either want to collaborate with others or separate your home and work life. Did you always feel confident that that was always going to be a solid foundation once everyone had got over the initial, I guess, excitement or fun or realization that they didn't have to work in the office and now we're working from home?
So I just lost you there on the question part. I heard everything else. How did you come on with the question? It just broke up.
No, don't worry. So I guess what I'm saying is, when that initial, when it initially kicked off, obviously there was that move from people working in offices to home, and that potentially could be the new norm. So, was that ever a fear or concern for you, or did you always sort of think that actually that would still, the desire to have a place to go and separate work from home would always be something that people want?
Yeah, look, in the initial lockdown summer last year, I had a few days of concern, but then a bit of a light bulb moment. I just thought, people get comfortable with mixing up their working week and some of it being home when the kids are out and whatnot, that the transition could be interesting. I think people were very shocked by the events of last year and probably so disrupted, and for the first time really managing their family and work life at the same time without any choice, although there was choice, but at a risk. I think what it might have created is, certain groups of people that would have embraced it and said, look, actually, I've realized that this has helped me an awful lot. But others, like myself, even though we're working in a commercial property business, I still had time at home with my kids, and I had to work around them at the last pandemic, and it was extremely difficult. But we got on with it and we did it. And if what you're doing in business is for your family, then you have to take the rough with the smooth and everything else. But in the end, it wasn't easy to have, let's say, Zoom calls with other business people, but they were very understanding because they were in it as well. So I just think it comes down to, I think what the world has now been able to do is understand each other's needs a lot better. There will be those that don't have kids that can't possibly understand what it's like being in that situation and probably think, well, I can't wait to get back to the city, and who would blame them? And they'll still be able to live that life. But I definitely see there being this sort of number settling down to around 40 to 45% of people that won't travel into the city centre anymore. But instead, companies...
That's significant. That is significant. That is, it's going to be massive.
But if it was 25% pre the pandemic that worked remotely, not saying that they all work from home, but if it was 25% of the people that worked remotely before, that was already a big number. And, you know, you might not be able to see that so much, you know, being, let's say, in a certain industry. It would need to be that you knew how digital nomads, coders, you know, marketing gurus work very happily remotely on the move. If you remember, pre-2020, it was all about, you know, going into hotels and, you know, there were lots of people not working in the city centre. I think everyone's very obsessed with what does city centre look like these days. And, you know, there are some clients that I'd love to, you know, we're looking at a pipeline where they don't yet know the start date, and that's understandable. But some of them want to be in central London. They want to take advantage of maybe discounted rates, so that's great. But I think what you'll see is a hybridization of a city sort of hub, the main HQ, and then, you know, tentacles that go out to the rural areas, regional areas, and people can access head office once, twice a week or whatever it is. And I don't see that being a problem at all going forward. You know, certainly not for some industries that do most of their work online. You know, there's such a big boom in the Amazon sector where people own their own Amazon shops that they would never dream of going into central London to do their business at all. Why do they need to? So the new normal, I think, yeah, it's going to need to settle down probably to around about 40% of people for the next year or two that will hybridize work from home and work centrally. It's just, if everyone sort of rushed back now, if Boris blew the whistle and said, right, everyone, you're all inoculated back to London, the sort of knock-on effect would be so great that even if the pandemic had disappeared today, it just would be too frantic for pick it all up when they left off. So I think the time we've got now for the next year or two to make most hybridized work environment, accept it and embrace it. And then as time progresses, maybe there'll be a bit more transition back to the old way of working. But I think it will be done in a very considered way, and again with a lot of change of use going on. So yeah,
that's interesting. Do you see there's going to be a potential migration away from, in terms of people living in the sort of those sort of commuter belts to sort of further away, and how that sort of plays into the, I guess, the commercial requirements of office space in more, you know, remote areas?
Again, it was already happening pre the pandemic because of that large chunk of people that already worked from home, had a local business, or, you know, thought that they didn't need to travel into the city centres too much. So it was already happening. So in the same way that we're sort of explaining the change of workplace setting, I think you can say the same is true of your home life setting, in that, of course, if you can pick up a 5-bed house that's another 3-4 miles out of, you know, out in the outer zones of where you live, but it doesn't impact on your commute to work, then why wouldn't you do it? But then, yes, it's look, I don't work in that residential sector to understand the growth. I imagine it's much higher than commercial real estate, the residential sector right now, in terms of demand and change of location. I think you only need to look, you know.
I think what we're seeing sorry, Dan.
I think there was a slight lag there. I think we're back.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's my end or it's your end. Well, this is one thing that's going to have to change, is better broadband, because obviously everyone needs a better wide connection. So the infrastructure needs to obviously improve on many fronts, particularly more out of the city centres. Brilliant. So Dan, so moving forward, Ofixu, what's your plans for 2021 with Ofixu, and where do you see it's all going?
Well, look, a lot of unique workspaces are climbing onto the platform. That's the first thing. A lot of people are realizing. Yeah, can you hear me? Seems to be a bit of a lag still.
Yeah.
Seems to be catching up. Are we good?
Yeah, we're all good, Dan.
Yeah, so I think, you know, like everybody else, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Still challenging to see when this lockdown is going to be lifted from a date point of view. I suppose we anticipate end of the month it's going to reduce down to tier 4 or 3 or whatever it is they decide to do. I think we'll have more clarity over companies' start dates for moving offices by then. But one has to sort of work around a predictive start time, and that's what we're doing at the moment. You know, lots of people just can't make a commitment until it's the right time to do it. And we've had some deals during the pandemic where they've taken advantage of rates and knew that they weren't going to hang around forever, these discounts. But I still think for this sector, I think it's the second half of this year is going to show the sort of, you know, the uptick is going to come around the second half. I think we'll see a much bigger move in March and April. I think February is preparing towards that. And as a company, we're still seeing a lot of unique workspaces coming on, property that's never been rented out before, and people making consideration to working, on monetizing their space. And certainly, you know, other companies want to get a good deal. You know, we had an inquiry last week. There's this company that's got millions of investment, astonishing amounts of money, but they don't want a big fancy block. They just want, derelict, disused pub, for example, at a discount price. They want to make it their own. They're just being very sort of, entrepreneurial about it, and out of your money. So, you know, it's going to be a really interesting change in the next 6 months. Yeah, for us as a company as well. It's going to still going to take time for us to find out where we sit in the market, and hopefully that will be, in a good position like the other great marketplaces and platforms out there that already have got years of experience dealing with service. But, you know, I hope that we fit in well from a, alternative workspace marketplace, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. I think there's a lot of exciting sort of times ahead, opportunities ahead, positivity as well. I think obviously with everything that's happening, we've got some positive news that's slowly sort of coming through with the vaccination. So it's interesting. We do sort of predict, I guess, and we assume that these changes that we're seeing are going to be the new norm. But the other part of me wonders whether after a while we'll revert back to the norm. It's going to play out, isn't it? The question is, I guess, whether it's been accelerated and this is the way things will be, and again, what's happened is just accelerated that process, or whether we'll just return to the norm. But we'll see how it pan out.
You know what? I just, it's kind of like this. If something works, it works, and if people do transition to this new normal, and the likes of the,
Dan, I think what we'll do, mate, is we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I've lost you.
Hey, Dan, what I'm going to do, mate, I'm just going to end the broadcast because I think we're just